Welcome to Branch Out, the Forestry Department's quarterly newsletter keeping you up to date on what the agency has been up to and what we will be doing. Join us on an exciting journey of forest conservation with learning, discovery, and environmental stewardship. In this episode, we log into the roots of forest conservation and explore how the Forestry Department is protecting Jamaica's natural treasures. The root of it all. Ainsley A. Henry, CEO and Conservator of Forests, explores the question: society is full of problems. Is forest conservation really as urgent as we think?
Yes, forest conservation is extremely urgent despite the many challenges that we face in our society. And we do recognize that there are many. Forest conservation is critical because it is the linchpin of our growth, our prosperity, our society's continued survival. And I say this because there are several key functions that forests provide. Everything from generating oxygen through trees, as well as protecting us from flooding, erosion, climate change in real terms. And the benefits are significant. We have rural jobs that are created, we have ecotourism as a possibility, we have opportunities for health and recreational activities, and at the same time we also have the benefit of protecting our biodiversity and ensuring that Jamaica's place as the land of wood and water is maintained. The function, the mandate, the work of the Forestry Department is critical. As the lead agency for forest conservation and management in Jamaica, we do many things. We facilitate the reforestation of denuded areas. We have a large thrust now on urban forests and urban trees, and this is critical to ensuring the livability of our cities, not just in terms of the elimination of pollution, but also in terms of the cooling effect, so as to minimize heat island effect and hence making it more pleasant to walk. But the Forestry Department is also key in building out the context of forestry as a business and hence helping us to contribute to the growth and development of our country. The health and wellness benefits that I mentioned before are also critical. It is through things like the conservation of our spaces that we're going to be able to allow for and manage and sustainably use for present and future generations these spaces to deliver things like hiking, walking, cycling, bird watching, and just generally forest bathing activities, which are critical to our health and our mental well-being. The Forestry Department is at the vanguard of climate change. We are the entity in Jamaica that is ensuring not only that the trees that we have are maintained, but that we actually have more trees. It is therefore important that an agency like this exists, because the work that it is doing is not just urgent and critical, it is absolutely essential. We all recognize the impact that climate change has had on us and continues to have on us, and it is hence necessary for us not only to do what we've done in the past, but to redouble our efforts. And that is why, having recently successfully concluded the National Tree Planting Initiative with 3 million trees, we are now poised to do it again and do it better this time. I assume that anyone that tries to imagine Jamaica without trees will fall in one of two categories: either someone looking for the developed and highly urbanized landscape, but I'd like to point out to those people that even in urbanized landscapes, and more so as we progress as a human society, there's an increased thrust to improving and increasing the amount of green infrastructure within cityscapes. because green infrastructure makes cities more livable. And if we weren't to have that green infrastructure, then I imagine that the hottest temperatures that we've ever experienced would be far lower than what we would be experiencing in that landscape. I also expect that whenever it rains, there would be floods and significant storm runoff. I expect that the air quality would be poor, and that the beauty and benefits of being able to go outside and pick a Jula mango off the tree would be one of those things that certainly, as Jamaicans, we would miss. The other people who would imagine such a thing would be the environmentalists that would be concerned that that's where we're going.
So our focus is to conserve and manage forest resources generally. We have forest reserves across the length and breadth of the country, and in those forest reserves we preserve various endemic species as well as manage the resources there. Management of forest resources means much more than simply conserving.
I see my family over here, the Boy's family.
In some instances what's already there. We're about to start a tree harvesting campaign.
The champion.
We've got a lot of pine in Jamaica, and we're going to take out some of that pine and put in nature species.
He says great, he was the first 5-year-old to cross the finish line.
Modern information suggests that it's time to fix some of the wrongs of the pine.
Logging in. Khadija James, legal officer, takes a look at standing timber harvesting. Did you know harvesting trees is also a part of forest conservation? But there is a right way to do it.
Most people are aware of the Forestry Department's core function, which is to manage forest estates on crown lands and to be responsible for the conservation of those forests, but the agency is also responsible for supervising the exploitation of any forest resources and to ensure that we have plans to adequately replace those resources that are used up. The agency is also responsible for supervising the milling and sale of timber in the island generally. As it relates to standing timber harvesting, there are certain conditions within our legislative framework that must be present in order for standing timber harvesting to take place. The trees that will be harvested cannot go beyond the annual allowable cut. The trees that will be harvested must be approved in an approved forest management plan. And the trees that will be cut, we must have adequate systems in place for a replanting system. In order to participate in standing timber harvesting, a person will need 5 licenses and permits. They'll need a road use permit in order to use the road in the forest reserve to get to the plot where the harvesting will take place. They will need a sawmill license in order to trade and store locally produced lumber. They will need a license to remove forest produce in order to take the trees that have been cut out of the forest reserve. They will need a timber license in order to show that they have the permission from the conservator of forest to be participating in standing timber harvesting, and they will also need a license to carry a power-driven saw into the forest reserve to do the harvesting exercise.
We also take a look at the Jamaica Mangroves Plus project, the country's first step in its implementation of the National Mangrove and Swamp Forests Management Plan. Project manager Denise Henry and communication consultant Renee Richards have been very active in several mangrove restoration activities such as cleanups, capacity building workshops, and mangrove replanting with local partners such as the Discovery Bay Marine Lab, the Port Royal Marine Lab, and the National Environment and Planning Agency.
So the debris, which is primary man-based debris, so we're finding a lot of plastic bottles, forks, stuff that's washed in from land, and it gets caught in the mangrove roots and takes up the space that these roots would normally grow through, as well as where the propagules, where the young mangroves would drop and establish new mangrove trees. So because this debris is on the ground, we've lost that space for new regeneration of plants. Oh, mangrove areas are used for a number of things. I mean, one of the biggest uses is development, both small scale and large scale development. You have informal settlements that go in, clear mangroves, dump it to create space for buildings, as well as big coastal developments. But it's also used for aquaculture, so people clear it for farming, for ponds. So these are some of the threats that are affecting it that we are doing to our mangroves. So mangroves are one of the barriers that when wave energy and wind energy is coming in from our hurricanes and even from the smallest storms, it creates this barrier that slows down that wave energy, that wind energy. It slows down the water coming into land, preventing flooding in communities that are behind mangrove areas. So there is success in mangrove restoration. It is not as successful as people think, because if you alter the environment too much, then it won't grow back there. So if you change like the way the water flows through the environment, then the mangroves can't grow there again. If you change the soil too much, then it can't grow there again. So what we really need to do is protect our mangroves, have them protected on the law, have them protected in our actions for treat our mangroves.
Principal Director of Forest Science and Technology Services, Donolu, gives a few highlights from the recently concluded Land Use Land Cover Change Assessment at the National Environment Awareness Week Symposium held at the Jamaica Conference Center on World Environment Day, June 5th.
So we have the latest land use data for the entire island. So if you're interested in that, the Forestry Department, we're looking at 47.9% of our entire country covered with forest. This is impressive because when you look at global averages, it is 31.1%. And in the last 2013 assessment we did, it was 40%. 76% of all that green space that you saw on the map is in private hands. Your grandparents, you and others hold that forest land. And we have to encourage some conservation of what we see, the conversion of our primary or quality forest going into secondary forest where biodiversity is lowest. We also find that our secondary forest, the one that is at high risk of reversal, is actually being transformed or permanently transferred into buildings and infrastructure. Just look around you and you can see that quality forest. You will find it in, no surprise, Trelawney, that's associated with the Cockpit Country, and Portland, which is associated with the Blue and Jumper Mountain, and of course we will find some in St. Anne and all the way in Hanover that is linked to the Dolphin Head Mountains. Additionally, when we look at our mangroves, the bulk of our mangroves are confined to St. Thomas, not St. Thomas, but St. Catherine, Clarendon, and Westmoreland. So what are the challenges, are the factors affecting forest cover decline? Over every decade, the emphasis changes. In 1989 to 1998, it was agriculture and mining. In 1998 to 2013, we see that there is a gradual shift to infrastructure development. How did we get back on forest cover? We have active participation from all the community projects that you have been involved in. Certainly, you must have planted one seedling in the 3 in 3 that we had for the last 5 years. So we have active reforestation programs. We try as best as possible to encourage and roll out sustainable forest management practices, and of course, natural regeneration. Natural regen, leave the land alone and the trees will grow.
This tree relocation device, which as you can see, is a heavy-duty machine with a specialized tree spade and is the very first of its kind in the Caribbean. It will enable us to safely and efficiently dig up and relocate and replant some of the mature trees that development activities would have otherwise destroyed. As of today, rather than simply cutting down trees, we now have the capability to move them, to save them, to keep them growing, especially in our urban areas where they are needed the most.
That's it for our June 2025 issue. Join us again for the next episode as we branch out to greater horizons for forest conservation.